Can the Blues bounce back from a disaster in Paris? Chelsea play host to Newcastle at the weekend. Both teams in Champions League action. Newcastle thought they had their winner over Barcelona, bar a late Lamine Yamal penalty, having different ideas. Chelsea with a disaster in the French capital. Tolu, it's been an interesting week for Chelsea. They had that fascinating cup tie against Wrexham on Saturday where they won 4-2. They lost 5-2 to PSG. Is the goalkeeper the main problem? Because they've tried Robert Sanchez, he has errors. They tried Philippe Jorgensen against PSG. He was at cost for their third goal. They just can't seem to solve that position. Is that going to be an issue come the weekend?
It depends on who he picks for that game, whether it's going to be Philippe Jorgensen or he'll revert back to Robert Sanchez. I personally don't think that when you get to the business side of the season, when it comes to the home straight, I don't think that's the period where you start to switch goalkeepers. I quite didn't understand why Philippe Jorgensen got into the team at Robert Sanchez. Yes, Sanchez, if you listen to Chelsea fans, they'll tell you he probably doesn't impose himself enough. But he also has the odd error in him here and there. But you have to admit that he is a fantastic goalkeeper, good shot stopper. If you ask me, I go for a shot stopper rather than a goalkeeper who can play with his feet. And I think that's what the new manager, Liam Rossini, is looking for. I think Philippe Jorgensen is a lot better with his feet than Robert Sanchez, although there's talk about the fact that the current Strasbourg goalkeeper, who is also on the Chelsea books, is the one that's looked at as the future solution to that goalkeeping problem. Chelsea are a funny old team, to be honest. They beat Aston Villa 4-1 in a game that I didn't think they particularly played well early on. The game could have gone either way. I think Chelsea are a team of moments, and I've always said that the fact that they have a lot of young players, pretty inexperienced, and have never particularly won any major honours. Look, forget about the FIFA Club World Cup and the Conference League. Those are two trophies that any of the other teams in the top six would probably have challenged and won anyway. No disrespect to what Chelsea have done. But you look at those three games I've mentioned now. Game against Villa, they easily could have lost a game that they controlled. Not because Villa were better than them, but because in key moments, they made some very, very horrible decisions. If Ollie Watkins' second goal for Villa had gone in just before halftime, we might not have been talking about Chelsea beating Villa 4-1. The Wrexham game, if the Wrexham player hadn't gotten sent off before extra time, that also could have gone very bad in a game that you thought Chelsea should have controlled. The game against PSG, to be honest, I thought Chelsea played really well until Cavasielia came off the bench. I thought Chelsea had the game under control. And at 3-2, I didn't quite understand what the approach was. How do you get countered in an away game, the first leg of crucial time in the Champions League against a team like PSG, when you've got the home leg in London where you have a good chance of overturning it? PSG aren't the PSG from last season. I think everybody accepts that. I think Chelsea will look at themselves and feel really badly about that. I think going into the game this weekend, it's another really tough one. They don't keep clean sheets, this Chelsea team, and that could be their biggest undoing. They've scored in 9 of the last 10 matches. They've only kept 1 clean sheet in those 10 games, and 8 of those games have produced over 2.5 goals. So that just tells you a picture of what this Chelsea team is about. At what point will we hold the manager up? I'm not the biggest fan of Liam Rossini. I think he likes to hear himself talk a little too much. I feel like when you're a top manager in the Premier League, you have to probably keep the press guessing a bit. I don't think he keeps them guessing. I think he just comes and always wants to be honest. Look at the top managers in the Premier League, the ones who have won trophies. They're not honest guys. Pep Guardiola decided to come to a press conference, answer no questions, and be very vague with his responses. Mikel Arteta is the king when it comes to that. Arne Slot has learned the hard way. He's been a lot nicer, and Liverpool are worse off for it. So I think the team has to probably look at themselves. I think Liam Rossini, I still think the jury is out on him. I don't think he should be switching goalkeepers. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets Robert Sanchez back into the post, but I think that's very unlikely. I think he fancies Philippe Jorgensen a lot better than Robert Sanchez. It remains to be seen what happens, but I feel like they're out of the Champions League. They really should face the game against Newcastle. I don't think he should rest players for this one, hoping to overturn the game against PSG. I feel he'll go strong against Newcastle, and I think Chelsea have a good chance of winning this one.
Okay, let's look at it from a Newcastle perspective then. We've touched on them recently about what they need to do to get into Europe. The FA Cup route now closed off after their defeat at the weekend. The Champions League route still very much alive going into the second leg. But that's going to be a lot harder to win the Champions League. the Premier League could still offer them a route into Europe next season. They start the weekend in 12th. They had an important win in their last league fixture. They're only 5 points off Brentford in 7th. So far from done for in terms of Premier League positioning, but their inconsistency is always their bugbear, their thorn in their side, isn't it? So is that going to be more of an issue at the weekend, or can they build on that last league win over Manchester United and make it 2 in a row?
Yeah, I think they can. They definitely can. They're one of those teams who have got it in them. I think maybe apart from the top two, that's Newcastle, Arsenal, and City, where I think Newcastle can go and really feel inferior. I think they can go to any other person below those top two and feel like they've got a real chance of having a go. Look, they played really well against United with 10 men, even though it was at St. James's. And whether you like it or not, they got the better of Barcelona, who literally huffed and puffed in that game. They kept all of Barcelona's top players very quiet in that first game in the Champions League. It was very, very disappointing that they couldn't take an advantage into the second leg. But my problem with them is their away record in the Premier League. No wins in 4 of the last 6 away games. That's horrible, horrible form from Eddie Howe's men. There's talk around fatigue. But now, look, they've got options, finally, which was something they didn't have earlier in the season. Sven Botman is back, can't get into the team. Very interesting the way they set up against Barcelona. They had their 2 recognized strikers on the bench. Anthony Gordon was suffering from a bit of illness, was also on the bench, and they still competed. So the way I look at it, they've got Nick Voltemada, they've got Vissa, and they've got Anthony Gordon, all fresh from the midweek game of the Champions League, raring to go against Chelsea. Chelsea, on the other hand, played their entire first team, the strongest team, away at PSG and got thumped. So I think this one could be really, really. I just have a sneaky feeling about Newcastle. I've had a sneaky feeling about them for the last couple of weeks, but they haven't really done anything. I thought they could sneak something against City, weren't able to do that. But I feel like they're slowly starting to get the energy levels back up. I think they're slow, and I think it's down to the fact that most of the players were injured early in the season, have come back. I think they've got a bigger squad to work with now, unlike what they did early in the season. So I really would like to see how they go up against Chelsea this weekend. I feel like Eddie Howe's probably going to get more important players into this one, fresher than the Chelsea guys. Like I said, Nick Voltemada, Johan Vissa, and Anthony Gordon didn't start the game in midweek, so they will be pushing to start against Chelsea. I think Chelsea has to be very wary. This Newcastle team is good enough to go to Stamford Bridge and not only get a point, but if Chelsea don't show up, you can get a win.
And Tolu, of course, the scheduling of this fixture, jam-packed between 2 Champions League ties, the second leg of each of those to follow in midweek. When you look at the lineups of both teams, will they have the luxury of resting players? Will they be more focusing on Europe? It's a tough one for both Eddie Howe and Liam Rosenior. How do they handle it?
I think both will have an eye on the Champions League. I think Newcastle have a better chance. I think Chelsea are out, even though Liam Rosenior will argue with me for that. But I think, like I said, Newcastle rested a couple of players, not by choice, but really based on the tactics he adopted for the first leg against Barcelona. But for Chelsea, I think obviously they've got a big squad. You probably can argue that some of the second team players are not as good as the first team players. That's why they're second team players. Romeo Lavia, who's trying to build up his fitness, has come on a few times. Will probably play again this weekend. We'll get a chance to start. Liam Delap is one that has shocked me, to be honest. I felt like he was the kind of striker that Chelsea was screaming to have. It's disappointed. He probably will get a chance against Newcastle also. And then you look at the back line. I don't think that Rhys James can play 3 games in 7-8 days because of his fitness concerns. And of course, he obviously must play the return game against PSG. So I think if you play fantasy, you probably would be best to get him out of your team very quickly because he's not going to play. I just feel like both teams are, especially Chelsea, are stuck. If Chelsea play a weakened team, not necessarily a weakened team, they choose to leave out some of the key guys and play some of the other guys who are also decent. Alejandro Garnacho should start. He isn't a bad player. But if something goes wrong against Newcastle and then they lose to PSG, the noise will be a lot because then they would have missed out on the chance of winning a trophy. They'll only be in the FA Cup. You obviously know they cannot win the Premier League. So it could leave room for some noise. I think for Newcastle fans, I don't think they're looking at qualifying for the Champions League, but anything in Europe will do for them at the moment. So I think they probably might benefit from resting a few players rather than Chelsea, who are condemned to go for those Champions League places.
Well, Tolu, it's time to put your betting hat on. Which way's the money going at Stamford Bridge?
I told you earlier, Chelsea have scored in their 9 of the last 10, failed to keep a clean sheet in any of those games, and 8 of those games have produced over 2.5 goals. Both teams absolutely cannot defend at the moment, especially Newcastle away from home, where they're very, very poor. So I'm going to go over 2.5 goals here. I was thinking about going both teams to score, but I just have a sneaky feeling there will be lots of goals here. It's fatigue from, I don't think they can keep their concentration to keep the other team out for that long because of the exertions from midweek. And of course, there will be some slight changes. So I'm going to go with the value here. I think over 2.5 goals will be a smart choice.
It sounds a smart choice. Plenty of entertainment to follow at Stamford Bridge. Thanks as always, Tolu.
You're welcome, Dan.